Hello.
Welcome to the Golden History Channel.
Today we'll be covering cooking in the Elizabethan era.
I'm Shavonne and I'll be covering dining.
I'm Kayci and I'll be covering the cooking segment.
And I'm Korinne and I'll be covering how to set a table and the utensils used during the Elizabethan era.
Hope you
enjoy!
Elizabethans generally ate 3 meals a day: breakfast, dinner, and supper. Breakfast was eaten after church, and the wealthy attended church every day. Breakfast was always cold food, such as leftovers, eggs, butter, or bread, and beer was commonly drinking with breakfast. Anyone who got up after breakfast was served did not eat it. Nobles usually didn't get up for breakfast, and instead ate an enormous dinner. Working peoples, however, never failed to eat breakfast. Dinner was eaten midday, around 11 or 12 o'clock. Different people ate dinner in different ways and at different times. For example, a farmer would have brought food with him, but a craftsman would close his store and then go upstairs to the meal waiting. For gentlemen, however, dinner could be an all-day affair, depending on the day. Supper was the last meal of the day, and eaten between 5 and 8 o'clock. For a commoner, this would be the fanciest of meals, but of course, fancy is subjective. Opposed to dinner, which was sometimes not eaten at the common table, supper was always eaten there. Food eaten depended on the money available to each family. Commoners generally ate white meats and ate more vegetables than wealthy families. Commoners also only ate dark meats on very special occasions. Well-off people ate darker meats almost every day. But everyone ate fish, as it was actually a law that fish be eaten on Fridays and Saturdays to support the fishing industry. All classes did their best to create new and exciting dishes every day, which meant the wealthy families had an array of dishes constantly changing. Feasting was an occurrence that wasn't all too rare. Well-off families could make every meal a feast, while poorer people saved feasts for special occasions. A feast was only classified as 2 courses, appetizer and entree. In The English Housewife, Gervase Markham's details exactly what a feast would be like, in higher or lower classes. During their meals, most Elizabethans took little from each plate, rather than eating an entire dish and having none of something else. Before the meal, hands are washed in water infused with rose or rosemary. Then, grace was said. A blessing would be said by a clergyman, if one was present. If not, the eldest son was usually called upon to give thanks by reciting the following: O Lord, which givest thy creatures for our food, herbs, beasts, birds, fish, and other gifts of thine, bless thee thy gifts, that they may do us good, and we may live to praise thy name divine. And when the time is come this life to end, vouchsafe our souls to heaven may ascend. After this, the food is eaten. Dishes would be passed by servants if you were fortunate enough to have any. If not, they were passed along by the women and children. In every household, foods were picked out by your fingers so that they could not be returned. This was a mark of respect. During the meal, men ate with their hats on. Servants always had their hats off, as it was impolite to be around your betters with a hat on. White napkins were kept on the left shoulder or wrist, as to easily wipe the fingers or knives. During the meal, conversation was the norm, but chaos and rowdiness was shut down quickly. The meal could go on for hours, with multiple healths being pledged. In this time, these were not called toasts. Diners generally only drank alcohol, unless the doctor said otherwise. Beer and ale were the most popular, as was wine. Common folk generally ate out of wooden bowls or plates, but had pewter for special occasions. The wealthy had pewter for general use, and silver for special times. Depending on your status, you drank from a wood or leather cup, silver or pewter, or, if you were especially well off, glass goblets. When invited to dinner, guests brought their own utensils. The rich would have exquisitely made knives and spoons, and occasionally forks, and they were sometimes carried in an ornamental case. The poor often went without this, and they didn't even have forks. For entertainment, the rich would commonly pay for musicians or singers to play for them during their meal. As I'm sure you can tell, feasts were a very big deal in Elizabethan society, and there was never an important occasion without one, or two.
Hello, and welcome to the Elizabethan feast. The banquets and feasts were enjoyed by the Elizabethan royalty, nobility, and upper classes. The feast had consisted of 5 courses, each course containing a different food. The first course. In the first course, there was stuffed chicken and loin of veal. The last 2 dishes were covered with a German sauce with glit sugar plums and pomegranate seeds. At each end of the table, there was an enormous pie surrounded by smaller pies in the shape of a crown. The pies consisted of roe deer, goslings, 3 capons, 6 chickens, 10 pigeons, and 1 young rabbit. The second course. The second course had roe deer, goslings, chickens, and pigeons, such as the first. It also had a sturgeon, young rabbits, a leveret, a pig, a wild boar, and a heron. The third course. The third course had wafers and darioles. The fourth course. This course had a white cream, a cream with duck powder covered with fennel seeds, strawberries, and plums stewed in rose water. The fifth course. This course was entirely composed of prepared wine, sweet pastries, and cookies. Hope you enjoyed this lesson on the Elizabethan feast.
Hello, welcome. Today in this segment we're going to be learning how to set a fine table and the utensils used during the Elizabethan era. First, we're going to learn how to set a fine table. Come, follow me.
Welcome home, madam.
The main part of the table are the trenchers, today known as plates. Trenchers for the lower class citizens were made out of wood, but for higher class citizens they were made out of pewter. Trenchers were usually accompanied by a spoon or a knife, though many of the foods were eaten with the fingers. A fork, which is commonly used today, was not back then. A fork was only used for carving meat. If put directly in the mouth was considered impolite or rude. Next, the napkins, unlike today, were not placed in the lap or tucked into the shirt. They were slung over the shoulder or placed on the arm and secured by a pin. Napkins were used to wipe the utensils after being used. Table linens were referred to as napery. The first layer of the table is the carpet. Then it would be the table linens or napery. Next would be the trenchers, then the spoon and knife brought by the guest, your napkins, and a goblet. Depending if you were lower class, the goblet would be leather or wood. If you were higher class, it would be silver or pewter, and the very wealthy had glass. Bread was then placed on the table, 1 loaf of bread for every 2 diners. Servants would then come in with a basin of water for the guests to wash their fingers with. Then they would dry their hands on a towel. After dinner was finished, the leftover meats were then given to the servants or the poor behind the kitchen door. And this is how you set a fine table in the Elizabethan era. Now for the second part of this segment, the utensils of the Elizabethan era and their uses. First, the spoon. The spoon for the lower class was made out of wood, but for the higher class, it was made out of iron, brass, and other metals. Along with their spoon being made out of metal, there were pretty designs to show royalty. A fork was used to help with the carving of meat. Unlike today, it wasn't used very often. It was very rare for the Elizabethans to use it. Anything the fork does today was usually done by the knife. You already know, or might know, meat was very important to the Elizabethans. A knife was the most important tool on the planet to them. It was very common for Elizabethans to have a knife with them all the time. Men would have them attached to their belts, while women would have a cutlery bag with them. Knives, narrow and sharp features, people had to learn from a very young age how to use a knife properly so they could eat meat without having very little personal damage to themselves. Food versions of ladles, carving knives, meat forks, and meat scissors were used for preparing dinner to put out to the table. Also, mortar and pedestals were used for grinding nuts and spices, which was very important to the food of Elizabethan times. These are utensils used during the Elizabethan era. Thank you for listening to my segment of how to set a fine table and the utensils used during the Elizabethan era.
Hello, my name is Kayci, and today I will be teaching you how to make the classical Elizabethan dessert, sugar cookies. For this recipe, you will need 2 3/4 cups of all-purpose flour, 1/2 teaspoon of baking powder, 1 cup of butter softened, 1/2 cup of white sugar, 1 egg, and 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract. At this time, you're going to preheat the oven to 350 degrees. Now while we're waiting for the oven to preheat, we're going to start mixing our ingredients. First, you're going to start off with all of your dry ingredients, such as the flour, baking soda, and baking powder. With our wet ingredients. Now we're going to add in the dry ingredients. And the wet ingredients. And mix that all together. After a while, you should come out with something like this, the cookie dough. Now, we're going to just set them on the pans. Now we're going to pop these in the oven for about 11 to 15 minutes until your desired color. Bloopers! Welcome to Golden Cooking Channel. History should know. Fudge, I forgot what I was cooking segment.
I'm Korinne and I'll be covering
How to set a table.
Korinne.
The Golden History Channel.
Today we'll be covering cooking in the Elizabethan era.
I'm Shavonne and I'm covering dining. Kayci is covering cooking.
And I'm Korinne. Hi.
Oh yeah, the phone and Panera.
Panera bread.
Did you get me back and up in a shot?
Yeah, I did. That's why I stopped. Oh, it's still filming!
Hello.
Oh wait, we're...
Hope you enjoyed something and enjoyed. Bye.
You said hope you enjoyed something and enjoyed.
After dinner was finished,
I wanted
enjoyed.
Bye. Oh, we're saying it at the or
Bye.
Oh, hello.
No, guys, we're supposed to harmonize together.
Hope you learned something and enjoyed. Bye.